Hello, my name is Marco Repetto, and today we will be going over AP Microeconomics 2014 FRQ, question number 2. In the last video, I went over question number 1, so if you have not seen it, I suggest that you go see it. So let's get started. First, let's read the question. Ray's stable hires workers in a perfectly competitive factor market for unskilled labor. So that perfectly competitive factor market is a very important part of the question because that means that he has to charge at the exact equilibrium price. So let's move on. Using correctly labeled side-by-side graphs for the labor market and Ray's table, show how each of the following. 1, the equilibrium wage and quantity for unskilled labor, labeled WE and QE respectively. So first, let's start with that. Let's get the graph. Let's label it market. And then this will be the price, and this will be the quantity. So, as I'm sure you know, this is going to be the supply curve, and this is going to be the demand curve. And then where those two curves meet is the equilibrium point right here. And then with that, we can label the QE and the WE. In this case, W means wage, but we labeled it as price. So just know that it means the same thing. So that answers question number 1A. So now let's move on to question 2 for Ray's specific stable. So obviously for Ray, he won't have the supply curve because he doesn't control, or he isn't on a spot for the supply of workers there are. Instead, he just determines the demand he has for the workers, because obviously he does not control the workers themselves if he's trying to hire them. So because of that, we will only have a demand curve that will go like this. And then once again, this is the price, and this is the quantity. So the wage paid by Ray's stable and the quantity of unskilled labor, labeled QR and WR. So because the market dictates that it is at this point, that, and because it is a perfectly competitive factor market, that means that we need the exact same price or wage for Ray's market. Because if you were paying more than that, then he'd be wasting money. And if you're paying less than that, then that means that he would not acquire any workers because nobody would want to work for him. So that means that the price or the wage that he's paying is the same. And with that, we know that the supply of workers will also be the same. So this is QR. And then this is WR. So Now that we've answered the total of question A, let's move on to B. Is the marginal factor cost of unskilled labor for race table greater than, less than, or equal to WE? So this is essentially what we just went over. Because it is a perfectly competitive factor market, that means that the marginal factor cost, or the amount that he has to pay, the price, is going to be the exact same for the market and race table. So that means that it is equal to WE. So let's move on to number C, or letter C. Now assume that the government imposes an effective minimum wage for unskilled labor. So the fact that it is effective means that it has to change the status quo. As we know, the status quo is at this equilibrium point. So if we want to change that, we have to be above the equilibrium point. And if we want to depict that in our graph, we're going to make another line appear. And that will be labeled W-min, as it tells us to label in part I, or part 1. W-min. In part 2, it asks us, on the labor market graph, part A, show the quantity of unskilled labor supplied in the market as a result of the minimum wage labeled QS. So, as we established before, this line is the supply. So where the minimum wage corresponds with this supply curve is right here. And then it wants us to label that QS. If you're wondering why this makes sense, let's think about this. If you're a worker and all of a sudden you were to be paid more than you were before, then more workers would want to work because there's a higher incentive to work. And if more workers want to work, then that means that there's a higher supply of workers. But at the same time, if we look at the demand curve, the employers don't want to hire as many people, or the demand is lower because they would have to pay more. So the supply for quantity is higher, yet the demand is lower. And for both of them, the price is the same because of that minimum price. So now let's move on to part 3. As a result of the new minimum wage, will the marginal revenue product of the last worker hired by race table increase, decrease, or stay the same? So the marginal revenue product, so how much their last worker made. So as we established before, the last worker would be earning at this WR right here. Although with this minimum wage in place, let's extend it to raise graph. That would mean that that worker would no longer earn that equilibrium price. Instead, they would earn this new price minimum, which means that their wages would be going up. So the last worker hired by raise table would increase. And with that, we've completed question 2 of the 2014 FRQ for microeconomics. Make sure to like and subscribe to Vertex Tutors. And if you have any questions, be sure to ask them. Thank you very much, and see you next time.